sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below letting me know what you think about celebrity interviews going off the rails. The morning started like any other day on The View. The familiar theme music played as the hosts took their positions at the iconic table, the studio audience buzzing with anticipation for another episode of daytime television's most talked-about talk show. Joy Behar sat in her usual spot, coffee mug in hand, looking over her notes with that characteristic smirk that regular viewers know all too well. The show's producers had landed a major coup. Brad Pitt was scheduled to appear to promote his latest film, and everyone expected it to be the kind of smooth, charming interview that A-list actors are known for delivering. As the cameras rolled and the show went live, Joy turned to the audience with her trademark enthusiasm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest joining us today. He's one of the biggest movie stars in the world, and he's here to talk about his new film. Please welcome Brad Pitt." The audience erupted in applause as Brad walked onto the set, flashing that famous smile and waving to the crowd. He looked relaxed and confident as he approached the table, dressed casually in a navy blue button-down shirt and jeans, embodying the effortless cool that has made him a global icon for decades. "Brad, thank you so much for being here," Joy said as he settled into the guest chair, her tone surprisingly warm considering what was about to unfold. "It's great to be here, Joy," Brad replied, his voice carrying that familiar laid-back quality that fans around the world have come to love. "I've been looking forward to this conversation." The other hosts chimed in with their greetings, and for the first few minutes, everything seemed perfectly normal. They chatted about his new movie, the filming experience, and his upcoming projects, with Brad giving thoughtful, engaging answers that had the audience hanging on every word. But then something shifted in Joy's demeanor. Her questions became more pointed, more personal, straying far from the typical promotional interview format. "You know, Brad," she said, leaning forward with that look in her eyes that regular viewers recognize as trouble brewing. "There's been a lot of talk lately about your personal life, your relationships, your parenting style. Some people are saying you're not quite the family man you pretend to be." The comment hung in the air like a dark cloud, and Brad's expression immediately changed. His smile faded, replaced by a look of confusion and growing irritation. "I'm sorry, Joy, but I thought we were here to talk about the film," Brad said, his voice still controlled, but with an edge that hadn't been there moments before. "I mean, that's what my publicist told me this interview was about." Joy waved her hand dismissively, as if his concerns were completely irrelevant. "Oh, come on, Brad, you're a big boy. You know how these things work. People want to know about the real you, not just some sanitized version your PR team wants us to see." The other hosts exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the direction Joy was taking the conversation. But none of them stepped in to redirect things back to safer territory. "With all due respect," Brad said, his jaw tightening slightly, "I came here as a professional courtesy to promote a film that a lot of people worked very hard on. I didn't come here to be ambushed about my personal life." His voice remained steady, but anyone paying attention could see that his patience was beginning to wear thin. Joy seemed to sense this and, rather than backing down, decided to push even harder. "Ambushed? Really? That's what you call a few honest questions? Maybe you're just not used to dealing with journalists who aren't willing to kiss your feet because you're a movie star." The tension in the studio was now palpable. The audience, which had been enthusiastic just minutes earlier, was now silent, sensing that something was going very wrong. Brad sat back in his chair, taking a deep breath as he tried to maintain his composure. "Joy, I've done thousands of interviews over the years, and I've never had a problem answering tough questions about my work, my craft, or even reasonable questions about my life. But what you're doing right now isn't journalism, it's just being deliberately provocative for the sake of ratings." Joy's eyes flashed with anger at his response. "Oh, so now I don't know how to do my job? Is that what you're saying? Maybe you should stick to reading lines written by other people and leave the thinking to those of us who actually have something to say." The insult was so blatant and unprofessional that even some of the audience members gasped audibly. Brad's hands clenched into fists on the arms of his chair, and his famous composure finally began to crack. "That was completely uncalled for," he said, his voice now carrying a warning tone that anyone who knew him would recognize as the calm before the storm. Joy seemed to take Brad's warning as a challenge, rather than the olive branch it was meant to be. She leaned back in her chair with a satisfied smirk, clearly enjoying the fact that she had gotten under his skin. "Oh, did I hit a nerve? You know, Brad, this is live television. Maybe you should have prepared better if you can't handle a little heat." Her tone was dripping with condescension, and it was clear she had no intention of letting up. Brad stared at her for a long moment, his blue eyes flashing with an intensity that made several audience members shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Joy, I need you to understand something," Brad said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level that somehow carried more weight than if he had been shouting. "I came here out of respect for this show and its viewers. I've always had nothing but good things to say about The View and everyone who works here. But right now, you're making it very difficult for me to maintain that respect." The other hosts looked like they wanted to crawl under the table. Whoopi Goldberg, who usually commands the room with authority, seemed frozen, unsure how to handle the situation that was spiraling completely out of control before their eyes. But Joy was far from finished. In fact, Brad's attempt at diplomacy seemed to embolden her even further. "Oh, please, spare me the wounded dignity act. You Hollywood types are all the same. You think you can waltz in here, promote whatever movie you need to sell tickets for, and expect everyone to just nod along and tell you how wonderful you are. Well, I've got news for you, pretty boy. Some of us actually ask the hard questions." The nickname was delivered with such venom that even the camera operator seemed to flinch. Brad's face went through several emotions in the span of a few seconds, from disbelief to anger to something that looked almost like pity. "Pretty boy?" Brad repeated slowly, as if he couldn't quite believe what he had just heard. "Did you really just call me that on national television?" Joy shrugged, completely unrepentant. "If the shoe fits. Look, I've been doing this job for decades, and I've interviewed everyone from presidents to pop stars. I don't need some actor telling me how to do my job just because he doesn't like getting called out." The smugness in her voice was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. And it was clear she thought she was winning whatever game she believed they were playing. "Called out for what exactly?" Brad asked, his voice rising slightly for the first time since the interview began. "What exactly have I done that requires calling out? I showed up on time, I've been polite and respectful, I've answered every reasonable question you've asked about my work. What more do you want from me?" Joy's response was swift and brutal. "How about some honesty for once? How about admitting that this whole nice guy image is just an act? How about acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, some of the things people say about you behind closed doors might actually be true?" The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Brad's face went completely still, and when he spoke again, his voice had taken on a quality that made everyone in the studio hold their breath. "Joy, I have no idea what rumors you're referring to, and frankly, I don't care. What I do care about is that you're using your platform to spread innuendo and gossip without any factual basis, and you're doing it to someone who came here as a guest in good faith. That's not journalism, that's just mean-spirited tabloid behavior." Joy's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Mean-spirited? You want to talk about mean-spirited? How about the way you've treated some of the people closest to you? How about we discuss some of those custody battles and what really went on behind closed doors?" She was now venturing into territory that any reasonable person would recognize as completely off-limits, but she seemed determined to push every button she could find. Brad's hands gripped the arms of his chair so tightly that his knuckles went white, and his jaw was clenched so hard that the muscles in his neck stood out like cords. "Joy, you need to stop right there," Brad said, his voice now carrying a tone of absolute authority that commanded attention from everyone in the room. "You're crossing lines that should never be crossed, especially on live television. This isn't entertainment. This is cruelty, and I won't sit here and let you continue to ambush me with personal attacks disguised as interview questions." For a moment, it seemed like his words might have gotten through to her, that she might realize she had gone too far. But Joy Behar had never been one to back down from a fight, especially not when she thought she had the upper hand. "Oh, now I'm being cruel? That's rich coming from someone who makes millions of dollars pretending to be other people for a living. Maybe if you were as good at being a real person as you are at playing characters, we wouldn't be having this conversation." The insult was so personal and so deliberately hurtful that several audience members actually gasped out loud. Even some of the crew members were shaking their heads in disbelief at what they were witnessing. Brad sat in stunned silence for several seconds, as if he couldn't quite process that someone would be so openly hostile to a guest on their own show. When he finally spoke, his voice was controlled, but filled with an undercurrent of fury that made everyone in the studio realize they were witnessing something unprecedented. Joy, in 30 years of doing interviews, I have never, and I mean never, been treated with such unprofessional disrespect. I don't know what your problem with me is, but this stops now. Either we have a civilized conversation about the film I came here to promote, or I'm walking out of here right now. The ultimatum was delivered with such quiet intensity that it felt like the entire studio was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Joy's response would prove to be the match that finally lit the fuse on Brad's famous temper. Joy looked at Brad with an expression of pure defiance, as if his ultimatum was nothing more than an empty threat from a spoiled celebrity who wasn't getting his way. She leaned forward, her voice dripping with sarcasm and contempt. "Oh, you're going to walk out? How very dramatic of you. I guess that's what happens when someone finally asks you real questions instead of lobbing softballs at you like every other interviewer does. Maybe you should walk out, Brad. Maybe that would show everyone watching exactly what kind of person you really are when you can't control the narrative." The words hit Brad like a slap across the face. His eyes flashed with an anger that was decades in the making, the culmination of years of maintaining his composure in the face of tabloid attacks and personal betrayals. But this was different. This was a television host, on live television, attacking him personally while he sat as a guest in her studio. The line between professional and personal had not just been crossed, it had been obliterated. "You know what, Joy?" Brad said, his voice starting low but building with each word like a gathering storm. "You want to see the real me? You want to know what I'm really thinking right now? Fine. Let me tell you exactly what I think about what you're doing here today." He stood up from his chair, towering over the table as his voice began to rise. "I think you're a bully who hides behind the pretense of journalism to attack people who can't fight back because they're constrained by politeness and professionalism." Joy's smug expression faltered slightly, but she wasn't about to back down. "Oh, please, don't try to turn this around on me. You're the one who can't handle a few tough questions. Maybe if you weren't so used to everyone kissing your feet, you'd be better prepared for real journalism." But Brad was just getting started, and 30 years of pent-up frustration was about to come pouring out. Real journalism? Brad's voice rose another notch, and he gestured emphatically with his hands. "Joy, let me explain something to you about real journalism, since you seem to be confused about what that actually means. Real journalism involves research, preparation, and asking questions that serve the public interest. What you're doing right now is reality television masquerading as news, and frankly, it's beneath both you and this show. You want to attack my character? You want to make insinuations about my personal life based on tabloid gossip? Fine. Let's talk about character. Let's talk about the character it takes to invite someone onto your show as a guest, and then ambush them with personal attacks. Let's talk about the character it takes to use your platform to spread rumors about someone's family, their children, their most private moments." Brad's voice was now booming across the studio, and several audience members were recording on their phones, despite the show's policy against it. Joy tried to interrupt, but Brad wasn't having it. "No, Joy. You don't get to talk now. You've had your turn to speak, and you used it to be cruel and unprofessional. Now it's my turn." The authority in his voice was absolute, and even Joy seemed momentarily stunned into silence. "You know what real courage looks like? Real courage is not hiding behind a television camera and a live audience to attack someone who came here in good faith. I have spent my entire career trying to be respectful to journalists, even when they ask difficult questions, even when they pry into my personal life. I do it because I understand that it's part of the job. But what you're doing right now isn't journalism, it's cruelty disguised as entertainment, and I won't stand for it anymore." Brad's face was flushed with anger, but his words were crystal clear and delivered with years of bottled-up passion. Joy finally found her voice again, but her tone had lost much of its earlier confidence. "Look, Brad, maybe we both got a little heated here. This is live television, things happen, emotions run high." But Brad cut her off before she could continue with what sounded like damage control, Oh no, Joy. You don't get to do that. You don't get to spend 20 minutes attacking me personally and then try to brush it off as just emotions running high. You want to know what I think about people who use their platform to tear others down instead of building them up? I think they're cowards. I think they're people who have become so cynical and bitter that they can't stand to see others succeed. I think they're people who have forgotten what it means to treat others with basic human dignity. The words were delivered like hammer blows, each one landing with devastating precision. I came here today to talk about a movie that I'm proud of, that represents the hard work of hundreds of talented people who deserve to have their work discussed with respect and professionalism. Instead, I got ambushed by someone who seems to think that being deliberately cruel is the same thing as being clever. His voice dropped slightly, but the intensity never wavered. Joy, I genuinely feel sorry for you. I feel sorry that you've become the kind of person who gets satisfaction from trying to hurt others. Brad sat back down, but his posture remained tense. So here's what's going to happen, Joy. Either we're going to have a professional conversation about the film I came here to promote, treating each other with respect, or I'm walking out of here right now and letting everyone watching draw their own conclusions about what they just witnessed. The ultimatum was delivered with quiet finality. For several long seconds, the studio was completely silent. Joy looked around at her co-hosts, who were all staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to disappointment. The audience was equally silent, as if they couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. Finally, Joy cleared her throat, her voice much smaller than before. Maybe we should take a commercial break. Brad shook his head firmly. No, Joy.